The hush of first class was broken only by the soft clinks of champagne flutes and the ambient hum of the jet engine. A uniformed flight attendant walked briskly down the aisle, her shoes clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. She stopped at seat 1A and cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me, ma'am. There seems to be a mistake," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll need you to move to seat 3C so we can accommodate one of our VIPs. The woman sitting in 1A looked up, her eyes calm and thoughtful behind thin-rimmed glasses. She wore a pressed navy suit and her laptop rested open on the tray, code dancing silently across the screen. Her dark brown skin glowed under the soft cabin lights, and her natural hair was wrapped in a neat bun. Her name was Dr. Elaine Booker. "Excuse me?" she asked, politely but firmly. "This is the seat printed on my boarding pass." Behind. The flight attendant, a tall man in an expensive blazer, huffed impatiently. He had the kind of entitled energy that buzzed before he even spoke. The attendant's body shifted subtly to block Elaine's view of him. "Yes, but this seat is generally reserved for our most loyal Diamond executive members," the attendant replied. "We'd like to offer you another seat with just as much comfort. Please understand, this seat is already spoken for." Elaine blinked once, then twice. She reached slowly into her crossbody leather bag and retrieved a platinum boarding pass. She held it up, steady. "Seat 1A, Diamond Executive, booked 6 weeks in advance." The attendant hesitated, her confidence briefly shaken. "I understand, ma'am, but you see, Mr. Harrington—" She tilted her head toward the man behind her. "He always sits here. He's a very important—" "I'm sure he is," Elaine interrupted gently. "But so am I. And this is my seat." Phones were already out. Subtle glows lit up across the cabin as whispers began to thread through the air. Elaine stayed calm. Then came the condescension. "Look, I'm just trying to make this easy for everyone," the attendant added, now with a slightly hardened tone. "There's a seat just a few rows back." "No," Elaine said softly, but with unmistakable finality. "I will not be moving. This is my seat." Harrington, the entitled businessman, finally spoke. "She doesn't even look like someone who belongs up here," he muttered under his breath. "Just loud enough." The woman in seat 2B shifted uncomfortably. Others began recording more openly now. Elaine didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, didn't lower her eyes, and that was the problem, for them. Earlier that day, Elaine had given a talk at the Women in Tech Equity Summit in Boston. She was the first Black woman to found and lead a major aerospace AI firm. Her work had transformed aircraft safety systems globally. Her company, Aerolith AI, had just finalized a $220 million contract with the same airline, though the staff on this flight clearly didn't recognize her. They saw only what they expected to see, and she was used to that. Her fingers hovered over her laptop as she calmly typed a note. Discriminated against. Flight 218. Request full transcript from surveillance. She hit send to her assistant. Then she folded her hands. "I'm staying," she said again, calmly. That's when the flight manager, a woman named Darla Pierce, came striding down the aisle, her steps fueled by manufactured authority. "Ma'am, we really need you to cooperate, or we'll have no choice but to escalate this." Elaine looked up at her. "You are escalating it already." Darla leaned in, lowering her voice but not her volume. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Elaine turned her phone's voice recorder on, plainly. "Can you state your name and position, please?" she asked politely. Darla's eyes narrowed. Then came the words that would echo across the internet 14 million times by sunset. "This seat isn't meant for everyone. Be respectful and move, or we'll have you removed." There was no ambiguity. No corporate spin could neutralize that statement. Elaine was escorted off the plane by 2 airport security officers, 15 minutes later. Not because she was violent, not because she was unruly, but because she refused to surrender her rightful seat to a man whose only credentials were arrogance and the presumption of belonging. The video went viral before her. Feet even hit the tarmac. But what the flight crew didn't realize was that Elaine Booker didn't need to go viral to matter. She already owned 19% of their parent company's AI infrastructure contract. Her algorithms powered their customer feedback loop. She personally negotiated their last digital safety audit, and now she had footage, witness statements, and a paper trail that traced directly back to bias, corruption, and a $200 million deal on the verge of collapse. What happened next wasn't revenge. It was accountability, delivered by someone who knew exactly how their systems worked because she had built them. 3 hours after Dr. Elaine Booker had been escorted off Flight 218, she sat in the minimalist corner suite of her company headquarters, 13 floors above the bustling streets of downtown Atlanta. Outside the tempered glass windows, the sky burned gold with late afternoon light, but the air inside the office had cooled to something steely and deliberate. Her assistant, Janelle, stepped inside with a tablet. "It's already started trending," she said. 17 million views. Your name's everywhere. LinkedIn, Reddit, even TechCrunch picked it up under the headline, "When a Black Woman Refuses to Yield, Even at 30,000 Feet." Elaine didn't flinch. "Did the transcript arrive from the airline?" Janelle nodded. "And the internal database has already flagged 3 instances of similar treatment by the same flight crew. All complaints suppressed. All customers offered vague apologies and mileage credits." Elaine swiped through the surveillance stills and transcripts. Her jaw tensed, just slightly. Then she opened her email and typed a subject line that would soon bring the entire boardroom of Northeastern Interair to a stunned, unblinking silence. Subject: Urgent, Flight 218, Contract Violation and Ethics Review. The message was addressed to the CEO, the General Counsel, and 3 executive board members of the airline. People who all knew Elaine, had shaken her hand, toasted her contracts, and yet had no idea she had been the woman they dragged off their flagship flight that morning. The body of the email was brief. To the Northeastern Interair Executive Board, this email serves as formal notice of a possible breach of Clause 14B in the Aerolith NIA Ethics and AI Alignment Contract. Attached, video, transcripts, and customer service audio of Flight 218. Per contract terms, Aerolith reserves the right to pause AI service integration and suspend security upgrades during ethics investigation. As Aerolith AI's founder, board chair, and majority stakeholder, I recommend your response within 12 hours. Dr. Elaine Booker, she hit send. 16 blocks away, inside Northeastern Interair's sleek glass headquarters, a series of phones lit up in rapid succession. The chief legal officer, Mark DeBose, was the first to see it. His face paled, and he bolted down the hallway toward the CEO's office, where Madeline Cross, a former aerospace VP turned corporate giant, was holding a quiet coffee meeting. He slid the tablet onto the table. "Madeline, look." She read the subject line. Her eyebrows lifted. Then she saw the name Elaine Booker. Her fingers stopped mid-sip. "That's not the same Elaine from this morning?" she asked, her voice unsure. "It's her," Mark said. "She's the one. We removed her from 1A. Cameras caught everything. She has the footage, the contract, the equity leverage, and the public already knows." Madeline's throat went dry. She opened the attachment. It took exactly 31 seconds for her to realize the company had made a catastrophic mistake. Back in Elaine's office, Janelle stood by with 2 folders. One's media statements. The other is the nuclear option, she said quietly. "A full AI disengagement plan. It would disable flight assistance systems across 41 aircraft in their fleet. Just a 7-hour delay, but the headlines..." Elaine took a long breath. "This isn't about destruction," she said. "It's about demonstration." She clicked open a file labeled "Voice Not Raised, Rights Denied." It was a PR initiative she'd outlined months earlier but had never launched. Until now. "Begin rollout," she said softly. "Time to remind them who builds the engines behind their comfort." Meanwhile, in the 27th floor conference room of Northeastern Interair, the board was scrambling. "We gave her the chair next to a lavatory?" someone muttered after watching the footage. "No, we escorted her off," Madeline snapped. "Even worse, we had her removed while the guy in a Vineyard Vines shirt told her she didn't look like a first-class passenger. She literally built the interface we use for customer profiling," another board member whispered. The irony hung in the room like smoke. Within the hour, the company's internal AI dashboards began dimming, screen by screen. Airport kiosks froze. Digital check-in panels rebooted with a warning message. "Temporarily unavailable due to ethics compliance review." That phrase spread like wildfire. Customers noticed, reporters noticed, Wall Street noticed, the share price hiccuped. By midnight, Elaine's LinkedIn post had passed 4.3 million shares, and her story became a rallying cry. Not because she shouted, not because she fought, but because she refused to shrink and had the power, poise, and platform to expose a system built to silence her. In a last-ditch attempt at PR control, Madeline called Elaine's direct line the next morning. The call was recorded. "Dr. Booker, we are deeply sorry," Madeline began. "We'd love to offer an apology, compensation, and—" Elaine interrupted calmly. "This isn't about an apology. It's about rewriting your policies, retraining your people, and restructuring your assumptions." A beat of silence. "We're prepared to commit to that," Madeline replied. "Good," Elaine said, "because I'm not the only one watching anymore." Then she hung up. That evening, as planes resumed normal function and AI systems came back online, a new plaque was quietly installed inside the executive terminal at Logan International Airport. "Reserved for those who build the future, not just board it," in honor of Dr. Elaine Booker. They scheduled the emergency boardroom meeting without her because they still didn't understand who she was. The air inside the Skylux corporate headquarters in Atlanta was sterile and expensive. Frosted glass, imported stone, lights that dimmed themselves according to the CEO's mood. A handful of C-level executives sat around a $70,000 conference table imported from Norway, sipping still water and glancing nervously toward the head of the room, where the chairman of the board was about to speak. He cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. "We have a situation." One of the VPs, a portly man in a navy suit that didn't quite fit, leaned forward. "You're talking about the video?" "No," another executive muttered. "He's talking about the tsunami underneath it." They all knew what he meant. The woman in seat 1A wasn't just some disgruntled flyer with a camera and a following. That had been their first, very costly assumption. Dr. Elaine Booker, who they had forcibly removed from one of their flagship transcontinental flights less than 24 hours earlier, was more than a passenger. She was a partner, a critical architect, a data sovereign in a system that relied entirely on her innovation. The COO spoke next, his voice sharp. "This wasn't just bad optics. She's a direct stakeholder in our predictive safety algorithms. She has proprietary ownership over a third of our data integration suite." A quiet gasp came from someone in the room who hadn't done their homework. "And that suite," the COO added, glancing around, "controls our flight scheduling route, optimization, customer satisfaction model, and about 90% of the sentiment analysis tools we license to other airlines." A beat of silence. "Gentlemen," the chairman said grimly, "we didn't just kick a customer off our plane. We kicked the engineer off, the one who built the engine mid-flight." Elaine, meanwhile, sat silently on the 42nd floor of a different building, one just a few blocks away. Her assistant Jordan poured her a cup of hibiscus tea. "They just started," Jordan said, nodding toward the encrypted live stream on her laptop. "You're not on the calendar, of course, but you've been listening for 7 minutes." Elaine smiled, but only faintly. Her hair was wrapped in a cobalt silk scarf, and her blazer was even sharper than the one she wore on the plane. Her fingers drummed the table. "They're finally realizing this isn't a PR problem," she said. "It's a systems problem." "Should we call in legal?" Jordan asked. Elaine shook her head. "Not yet. Let's see how far they'll fall. Before they reach for the ladder I'm already holding." Back in the Skylux boardroom, the panic had started to surface. "The footage has hit every platform," the VP of Communications announced, sliding a folder across the table. "Over 16 million views in 18 hours. Kacker Seat 1A is trending globally. Influencers are siding with her. Half a dozen activists have latched on, and so have our competitors." A junior exec leaned in. "Are we being sued?" "Not yet," someone answered. "But if she goes public about her involvement in our infrastructure, we might face questions about how we're using her IP. She never sold full ownership. She licensed it." That was the gut punch. Elaine had never signed over her tech. She licensed it to Skylux for strategic integration, on a renewable basis, with renewals subject to ethical compliance. And now, they had violated the very clause that guaranteed that renewal. "She's got us in a chokehold," the CFO muttered. "She doesn't want to choke you," came a voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned. Elaine stood in the doorway, uninvited, but completely unbothered. Jordan stood behind her, holding a tablet and a signed entry form. "Your assistant at reception seemed a little overwhelmed," she said. "So we helped ourselves." No one moved. No one objected. She walked forward and placed a copy of the original licensing contract on the table. "You'll see Section 14B, she said softly, refers to immediate contract nullification in the event of discrimination, harassment, or civil rights violations by your employees, on or off your aircraft." The chairman spoke for the first time since she entered. "We were about to call you in." "No," Elaine said, gently but with ice behind it. "You were about to negotiate from fear, not from partnership." She opened her own laptop. Behind her, the large screen flickered to life. A timeline appeared. Data models. Proof of integration. Her signature on every model that had elevated Skylux into the top 3 AI-integrated airline corporations in North America. "You don't need to apologize to me," she said calmly. "You need to apologize to the customers you lied to by claiming to be an inclusive, diverse, equitable company." A beat passed. "Then," she added, "you can start working on the $48 million lawsuit I'm filing tomorrow for breach of contract, emotional distress, and reputational damage." Back in the glass tower, she called home. Elaine later sipped her tea and watched the markets fluctuate. Skylux stock had fallen 14% by afternoon. Her legal team had finished the first draft of the lawsuit, and 3 competing airlines had already reached out with acquisition offers for her tech. Jordan sat across from her, wide-eyed. "You think they'll beg?" Elaine chuckled. "No." She closed her laptop. "I think they'll finally listen." It wasn't the press conference that made history. It was the silence right before it. The world had waited nearly 72 hours. 3 days since the grainy footage of Elaine Booker, poised, dignified, and unshaken, being escorted off the plane, in front of shocked passengers and smug airline staff, had detonated across social media like a bomb in slow motion. The story had evolved faster than anyone could script it. From passenger unfairly removed to black tech CEO wrongfully removed from her own client airline to finally, she built the brain that flies their planes and they tried to humiliate her. Elaine hadn't tweeted. She hadn't spoken to the media. She hadn't given her truth to anyone. But that was about to change. The apology press conference was called in a rush, so fast it felt forced. Skylux had rented out a sterile, high-end media hall with a backdrop they printed. Overnight, we stand for equity, integrity, innovation. The irony was lost on no one. Reporters gathered in the room like wolves circling a weakened deer. The CEO, a man who had once brushed off ethics training as a waste of a good afternoon, now stood behind the podium with shaking hands. His face was pale. He fumbled with his notes. "My name is Roderick Ames," he began, "and I am the Chief Executive Officer of Skylux International." His voice trembled, not from nerves, but from fear. He knew this wasn't a speech. It was a lifeline. And Elaine held the scissors. "We acknowledge, with full responsibility," he continued, "that our treatment of Dr. Elaine Booker, an esteemed passenger, innovator, and strategic partner, was not only inappropriate, but discriminatory and unethical." He paused, swallowed hard. It was wrong. Full stop. Gasps swept through the crowd. Not because he admitted it, but because the legal team had actually allowed him to. Skylux was being eaten alive in the media. Board members were being investigated for negligence. Investors were threatening to pull. They didn't issue an apology because they were sorry. They issued it because Elaine let them, in exchange for airtime. As the cameras stayed hot and the network stayed live, a door to the right of the stage opened, and Elaine Booker entered. No security, no entourage, just her and the momentum of the world at her back. The crowd hushed. Her silhouette was carved against the floodlights like something mythic. In a sapphire blazer and deep brown curls that seemed to defy gravity, she walked to the podium and didn't look at the CEO once. She looked into the crowd, into the camera, into history. "I am not here," she began, "to accept an apology from a corporation. Corporations don't speak, people do." She paused. "I am here because too many of us, too many women, too many black women, too many innovators, mothers, builders, have been humiliated in places we were hired to improve." The room was so quiet, you could hear the whir of a camera, zooming in. "I built a system that made Skylux billions. Not because I needed validation, but because I believed in progress, in safety, in human-centered design. And the moment I looked like someone inconvenient, they forgot I was the reason their planes flew on time." She let it breathe. This wasn't just a flight incident. This was a mirror. Now her voice lowered, deepened, and the world saw what too many of us already knew. That respect in public spaces is conditional until someone forces a condition of accountability. She turned, just briefly, toward the CEO. "I don't need your apology," she said, not cruelly, but with clarity. "What I need is change, policy, accountability, and control over the things I built." She laid out 3 demands in front of the world. Immediate reinstatement of ethical review boards across Skylux systems, with public oversight by an independent civil rights committee. Equity stake increases for all minority-led tech firms contributing to their aviation software. And most shocking of all, a 51% acquisition of Skylux's core algorithm by a new company led entirely by underrepresented technologists. The press gasped. The CEO blinked, and Elaine turned back to the crowd. "I'm not here to go viral," she said finally. "I'm here to go vertical. Because we're not crashing anymore. We're taking back the cockpit." That speech was later named one of the most important public addresses in modern corporate history. It was studied in universities, quoted by leaders, and whispered by young women in STEM who saw for the first time someone who looked like them telling a global company, "You don't own me. I architected you." Within 48 hours, all 3 demands were met. Skylux's board was reshuffled. Elaine became the chair of a new oversight tech coalition, and the media coined a term for what she'd done: The seat 1A reversal, a metaphor for any situation where a person removed from a space returns to control it entirely. That night, as cities around the world played her speech on jumbo screens and news tickers, Elaine sat on her terrace with a glass of chilled rosé. Jordan joined, her visibly emotional. "They're saying you might have just changed corporate equity law forever." Elaine smiled, watching planes move across the night sky like stars. Then she leaned back and whispered, "No, Jordan. I just reminded them whose sky this really is." Victory, it turns out, comes with its own enemies. The morning after Elaine Booker's speech changed the conversation across boardrooms and boulevards alike, the sun rose over a quieter battlefield, one most people never see. Not the media, not the trending hashtags, but emails, contracts, backroom calls, old alliances in expensive suits, the kind of war where they don't shout, they whisper, they wait, and they plan for the collapse of the woman who dared to take their wheel. At first, everything seemed like a celebration. Elaine's face was now on the cover of every tech magazine, from Wired to Forbes Women. Podcasts called her the new Katherine Johnson of commercial flight. Investors who once ignored her now called just to congratulate. But she knew that tone. She'd heard it in boardrooms for years. Applause that sounds a little too rehearsed. Compliments wrapped around calculations. Because deep beneath that applause was something far older than modern sexism or corporate racism. It was entitlement, and entitlement always finds a way to hit back. The first sign came subtle. Former Skylux engineer, whom Elaine had mentored years ago, posted a 14-tweet thread titled, "Elaine Booker is brilliant, but she's not perfect." It was soft sabotage, cleverly written, publicly polite, but razor-sharp underneath. She overlooked edge case logic in Flight Sync 4.1. She led with emotion over engineering in 2020. She's driven, but maybe too driven. The tech bros called it fair critique. Elaine recognized it immediately, the weaponization of balance. Then came the so-called concerned open letter, signed by 56 anonymous employees from a Skylux affiliate firm. They didn't attack her credentials. They questioned her judgment under pressure, her disruption of order, her visionary arrogance. It was all coded, the same old poison, just in better fonts. Meanwhile, inside the boardrooms Elaine now had access to, doors began quietly closing. Software access delays, budget restrictions for her new equity initiatives, sudden revisions to previously agreed terms. One executive slipped and called her decorative. Another leaned too close in a meeting and asked, "How long are you planning to actually run things before hiring someone?" Technical? Elaine didn't flinch. But she started documenting everything because she knew something that most people never prepare for. The only thing more dangerous than a system you confront is a system you beat. But Elaine didn't come from softness. She came from a lineage of women who raised babies with one hand and built revolutions with the other. A grandmother who cleaned planes before black women were allowed to fly them. A mother who taught night classes after being denied a raise for a job she trained her boss to do. And a daughter, yes, Jordan, who now looked at her with awe instead of apology. Elaine wasn't going to survive this. She was going to educate it. So she did something no one expected. She launched Code Black, a live-streamed initiative where she walked viewers through how systemic pushback operates in real time. She showed emails. She read meeting minutes. She explained policies that were written to sound neutral but punish whistleblowers, disrupt black leadership, and camouflage retaliation. Within a week, over 3 million people were watching. Law students, young engineers, HR directors, even a few CEOs. Suddenly, every whisper against her became part of the curriculum. Every insult, an exhibit. Elaine had done what her enemies feared most. She turned their secrets into syllabus. Skyluxes, Legal team tried to silence the stream. But Elaine, a silent partner in 5 open-source legal defense orgs, had already set traps. Everything she shared was public domain or approved by board transparency clauses, clauses she herself wrote into. The oversight contract, the day she took majority algorithm control, she didn't come to the war empty-handed. She brought the rule book, and she wrote her own footnotes. But it wasn't just legal heat she felt. One night, Jordan found a cracked window. Someone had thrown a stone at their townhouse in D.C. No note, no signature. Just impact. That's when Elaine made a call, not to the police, but to Margot Lynn, her old friend from a defense cybersecurity firm in Atlanta. Within hours, Elaine's entire digital infrastructure was reinforced with military-grade firewalls, facial recognition scanners, drone surveillance around her property. She wasn't just guarding herself, she was protecting a movement. Then the system panicked. When Elaine announced she'd be unveiling FlightSync Omega, a next-gen autonomous flight algorithm that bypassed Skylux's proprietary tech completely, the stock market shook. Skylux's value dropped 14% in 2 days. Legacy partners threatened to divest unless the board re-evaluated Elaine's oversight role. The chair of Skylux issued a private threat. If you go through with Omega, we will consider it a hostile act. Elaine sent back 3 words. Then prepare accordingly. Behind the scenes, allies began emerging. A quiet group of black female engineers from across Silicon Valley sent her encrypted messages of support. One wrote, "I've waited 12 years for someone like you. Tell us what to do." Another offered to resign from her own role at Meta to join Elaine's vision. Even former Skylux engineers, some who had once sided against her, were reconsidering. Because in Elaine's fight, they saw their own future. A future where you didn't have to apologize for taking up space you built. And just when the pressure hit its peak, when journalists began to frame it as a tech civil war, Elaine dropped the final blow. She had quietly partnered with an aerospace disruptor in Mumbai, Vahana X. Together, they finalized a deal, a new line of global airliners powered entirely by FlightSync Omega, cheaper, cleaner, faster, and free of Skylux. The Tau's first fleet named Seat 1A. It had been 48 hours since the chaos at LAX first unfolded. The airport incident, once brushed off as a minor altercation over seating arrangements, had now morphed into a viral storm sweeping across every major social platform, dominating headlines with the force of a cultural reckoning. The world had learned the truth. Amira Daniels wasn't just a well-dressed passenger sitting in 1A. She was the CEO of Obsidian International, one of the most powerful investment firms in the world, and the man who'd been dismissed and patronized by Gates staff for causing trouble was not her assistant. He was her husband and the company's chief strategy officer. But now, the real question wasn't who they were, but what they would do next. And everyone was about to find out. The boardroom at the corporate headquarters of North Sky Airlines was packed with legal counsel, PR executives, and senior leadership. The CEO, Dorian Grant, sat rigidly at the far end of the table, sweat glistening above his brow. Across from him sat Amira and Malcolm, not in designer travel wear this time, but in sleek charcoal suits. Her presence commanded the room like a judge entering a courtroom, and she wasted no time. "Let me be very clear," Amira began, her voice like tempered steel. "You didn't just mishandle a passenger. You made a statement that Black excellence still isn't recognized until it shouts, until it proves itself, until it bleeds in front of an audience." Malcolm opened his tablet, sliding it across the table. "Here are the logs of discriminatory complaints filed against your airline over the last 3 years. Over 76% involved staff interactions with people of color, and every single one was internally dismissed or ignored," the PR director tried to interject. "Ms. Daniels, we've issued a public apology. We've terminated the 3 individuals involved." "Terminated?" Amira raised an eyebrow. You mean you fired 3 pawns while the culture that built this issue from the ground up still sits comfortably in this room? There was a stunned silence. Amira stood up, her heels clicking like gunfire across the floor. North Sky's board has until the end of this week to review our final acquisition offer. You can accept our valuation now or face a public audit that will uncover every buried bias and misused bonus your staff has signed off in the last decade. You're buying North Sky? Dorian choked, color draining from his face. We already own 38% through shell holdings and partner funds, Malcolm said coolly. We just needed a reason to step in fully, and you handed it to us in the form of a gate agent with a god complex. As they left the boardroom, Amira paused by the receptionist's desk. A young black woman behind the counter mouthed, "Thank you." Amira nodded once and walked into the sunlight. By the end of the week, North Sky Airlines had a new executive board. The incident that began with a seat denial ended with a complete power shift. The same airport where Amira was humiliated now featured her face on a new banner near Gate 6B. Leadership is not given, it's earned, and we're here to elevate everyone. Because sometimes justice doesn't knock on the door, it buys the building. The first flight under Amira Daniels' ownership of North Sky Airlines was no ordinary maiden voyage. It was a symbol, not just of corporate power reclaimed, but of a world quietly rearranged by the very people it once overlooked. The date was printed in gold on every boarding pass, the day the air shifted. At 6:05 a.m. sharp, Flight 710 taxied onto the runway at JFK International. The air was thick with anticipation, not just from passengers, but from the media outlets live streaming the event, civil rights leaders who had gathered for the inaugural boarding, and celebrities who, until now, had only tweeted support. Cameras swarmed the terminal, not for paparazzi shots, but to capture a new history taking off. Inside the airport's elite Polaris lounge, Amira Daniels stood before the North Sky staff, all wearing newly tailored uniforms, darker hues with gold, trim, and most notably, a patch stitched into their sleeves that read, "Dignity is our destination." "I was once told that I didn't belong in seat 1A, she began, her voice resonant, calm, and unwavering. That someone else had been listed in my place. Today, I rewrite that list, and we make sure no one ever feels invisible in our sky again." Gasps of emotion swept through the crowd. Some cried quietly, others raised fists in the air. The camera panned to a new gate agent checking IDs. She was young, dark-skinned, and her name tag read, Destiny. She smiled warmly at an elderly Latino couple struggling with their luggage, then turned to help a teenage hijabi traveler looking lost. No assumptions, no prejudgments, just presence and care. Malcolm approached with 2 cappuccinos in hand. "We're on in 5, he whispered. Amira smiled. "Then let's make 5 minutes last for the next 5 decades." As they boarded, the aircraft cabin revealed its transformation. The standard sterile feel of first class had been replaced with warm oak paneling, curated art from emerging BIPOC artists, and even lullaby chimes from African and South Asian musical traditions that replaced the old sterile boarding dings. Every detail had intention. Every stitch was a reply to the silence that once muffled millions of voices. An older white man in a tailored suit, one of the passengers in 1A, stood and offered his hand as Amira approached. "I watched what happened, and I taught my grandson about it. Thank you for showing grace when you could have shown fire." She shook his hand and nodded. "Sometimes, fire can look like grace in a sharp suit." The flight took off with a calm so deep it felt sacred. Somewhere over the Atlantic, an announcement chimed. But this time, it wasn't the pilot. It was Amira's voice, played softly throughout the cabin. "To those who've ever been told to sit at the back. To those whose credentials were doubted, whose dignity was questioned. Today, the air belongs to you. Fly high, fly seen, fly home." As clouds rolled below the aircraft like ripples of silk, the world below watched a woman who was once denied. A seat now pilot the future of an entire industry. And in 1,000 boardrooms on 1,000,000 screens, one lesson rang louder than the jet engines cutting through the sky. Never underestimate the woman you tried to silence. She may own your runway tomorrow. The world had seen Amira Daniels command the skies, but they had not yet seen what she would do with the ground beneath her wings. 1 month after North Sky's historic relaunch, Amira stood not in a hangar or on a red carpet, but in the crumbling remains of an abandoned airfield in Tuskegee, Alabama. The same place where black pilots once trained in secret under segregated rules. A place forgotten by history, until now. The airstrip was cracked. The hangars rusted. Graffiti danced across the hangar walls, ghosts of another time whispering through peeling paint. But Amira didn't see decay. She saw potential, and pain, and power waiting to be reclaimed. I want every girl who was ever told she's too poor, too dark, too small, or too loud to fly to learn right here, Amira said, pointing toward a rundown shed that would soon become a state-of-the-art command center. The initiative was called LIFT. Not a flight school, she insisted, but a life school, a full academy for underrepresented youth, especially black girls, indigenous youth, children of immigrants, and foster kids. They wouldn't just learn to fly planes. They would learn to fly their own narratives, to write their own call signs into history. She funded it personally. No investors, no boardroom handshakes, just her and her people, former flight attendants who'd been let go for wearing braids. Pilots who were passed over for not fitting the company image. Engineers whose accents were mocked in interviews. Amira hired them all. Classes began at dawn, not in simulators, those came later, but in fields, with stories. Amira sat, cross-legged on the floor, reading from the journals of Bessie Coleman, the first African-American woman to hold a pilot license. She had to go to France because America wouldn't let her learn to fly, Amira told the kids, her voice soft but electric. But now, you don't have to go anywhere. The sky comes to you. The media tried to cover it, but Amira shut them out. This wasn't for headlines. This wasn't another PR tour. This was sacred ground. Each week, a new young student arrived, wide-eyed, some carrying trauma heavier than their backpacks. A 10-year-old named Zion, who hadn't spoken in months, whispered her first word during an aircraft inspection. A 14-year-old boy who lost his brother to gun violence said he wanted to learn aerial mapping to help cities plan safe streets. Every child's dream was documented, logged, and honored, not as an application, but as a declaration of flight. And then came Avi Day, a ceremony held on the runway where students chose their first pilot nickname. Some picked names like Phoenix, Gravity, or Justice. Others simply wrote their real names in capital letters on their jackets, as if to say, "Who I am is already enough." On the final day of the first term, Amira stood at the edge of the runway, watching 10 kids take off, 3 at a time, in 2-seater trainers. She didn't cry. She smiled so deeply it cracked through every year of silence she'd once endured. As they soared into the sky, the townspeople gathered below. Old Tuskegee veterans, once ignored, saluted the next generation. A mural began to form near the entrance gate. It depicted Amira not in a CEO chair or cockpit, but holding open a hangar door, her hand outstretched to the next pilot in line. She turned to Malcolm, who had returned from overseeing North Sky's European expansion. "This is the legacy," she said. "Not the fleet, not the shares. This," he nodded, eyes moist, "this is air justice. Because what good is reclaiming the sky if you don't open it for others?"